There's a voice that we all have in our heads that sounds pretty reasonable. It sounds responsible, it sounds wise at times. It'll say things like, "Hey, be realistic," or maybe now is not the right time, or think about all the risks, like maybe just wait until you're more ready. And we all kind of listen to that voice, and some of us probably listen to it for a lot longer than we should. But I want to suggest something that might be a bit uncomfortable to sit with. And it's the idea that this voice, it might not actually be wisdom. It might actually just be fear. And fear is a really cunning disguise, and it tricks us a lot more than we realize. I know this because I almost let it talk me out of doing this very thing right here. Not YouTube or content creation specifically, but this exact thing, which is talking about my faith, talking about inner life stuff, and just being someone who speaks very openly about God and purpose and just kind of what it means to be human. And I think deep down, I always knew I'd eventually get to this place, but I thought maybe there'd be a way to kind of just ease into it really nice and slow, maybe sprinkle these topics loosely into other things like filmmaking or various hobbies. But to be that person that just fully committed to it and was saying, like, hey, here I am and this is what I'm about, I definitely hesitated. I hesitated for a while. And the crazy part is that voice that almost stopped me, it didn't sound like fear. It sounded completely reasonable. It sounded smart. It sounded even like the right thing. It would say things like what do you even know? Like you're not qualified for this. You don't know theology. You're still so spiritually immature. You haven't even really studied the Bible like that. And there's people out there that are just way more smarter, way more Christian than you, and they're just going to think you're being naive or irresponsible. And you're better off just staying in your lane, stick to what you know. That's the best thing for you, Daniel. Every single one of those thoughts, it felt responsible, it felt grounded, it felt wise even. But here's what I eventually did realize is that fear is just a really bad communicator. It almost never shows up and says, "Hey, I'm scared, I'm terrified." That would just kind of be too easy and your brain would see right through it. But instead, it tricks you. It sneaks up on you and it puts on a mask. It borrows language of logic and wisdom and responsibility, and it makes a very convincing case for why you should just stay exactly where you're at. I think we spend a lot of time talking about fear in the obvious ways, which is like fear of failure, fear of the unknown, of what people might think. And those are all very much real, but I'd argue that the most dangerous version of fear is the one that you don't even recognize as fear. It's the voice that says, "Be realistic," or "Now is not the right time," or again, "Just wait until you're more ready." It's the voice that says, "Let's weigh out the pros and cons and think about the risks. Think about what's going to happen if all of this goes wrong." And I'm sure we've all had people in our lives who've said those very things to us. We've got parents that say they're looking out for our best interest, or the friend who just wants what's best for you. And to their defense, they're not wrong. They sound like the responsible person in the room, the one we should probably listen to. And sometimes, genuinely, it is wisdom. There are moments where caution is the right move and slowing down is what God is asking for you to do. But then that brings up the obvious next question, which is okay, so how do we tell the difference? So for me, there's a couple of signals that kind of help me discern between those two things. The first one is that wisdom usually has a sense of peace attached to it. Even when the decision is difficult or it's costly, there's just this underlying sense of like, this is right. There's a quiet settledness even in the difficulty, and fear just doesn't really have that. Fear feels more urgent, it's more anxious. It's the voice in our heads that just keeps cycling through those same arguments, trying to convince us, trying to get us to buy into it. whereas true wisdom really just kind of only needs to be said once. The second signal that I use is that wisdom tends to be oriented towards others. It asks, what's the right thing to do? Whereas fear is almost always about self. It's always about self preservation. It'll ask, what's the safest thing for me? When I was wrestling with this pivot away from videography and towards this stuff, I kept coming back to this one question, which was, is this voice really trying to protect me from something that's real? Or is it just something uncomfortable that I don't really want to deal with? Because those are two very different things. Real danger is very much worth protecting ourselves from. But things like discomfort, growth, change, being seen, maybe failing publicly, making mistakes in front of people, like those just aren't actual real threats. That's actually just the cost of what it looks like to become fully and authentically ourselves. There's a moment in the Bible where God calls Moses at the burning bush. And Moses, he doesn't say, "Oh my God, I'm scared." He says instead, "Oh, who am I to go to Pharaoh? Like, what if they don't believe me? What if I'm not a good enough speaker?" And so he's questioning God. He's questioning himself. He has doubts, and all of his objections, they do sound humble and reasonable, but again, there's just no real honest threat. It's just fear that's trying to just play a very convincing costume. And God's response to Moses isn't just like, "Huh, you know what? You're right. Never mind. Forget it. Don't worry about it." But instead, he says, "Go, and I will be with you." Now, I want to be clear. I don't think that every cautious thought is just fear in disguise. I'm not saying to ignore practical concerns or just walk blindly into things, but if there's something in your life that you genuinely feel called to, something that just kind of keeps coming back, no matter how many times you talk yourself out of it. And maybe there's something that really excites you, but also kind of scares you at the same time. Maybe that voice is worth examining and looking at more closely. Ask yourself honestly, like, is this a real threat or am I just scared? And it takes a lot of bravery and honesty to even answer that question for yourself. My 2 cents is just don't let fear keep you small. And I'm saying this as someone who has just kind of barely come out on the other side of this, someone who's also been mentally battling doubts and fears for a long time now. And so this is very fresh for me too. And, to be honest, I don't know where any of this goes, but this is the stuff that I do feel called to do. And for the first time in a long time, it genuinely feels like I'm stepping more into myself. If you're someone that's also wrestling with something similar right now, maybe a decision, a calling, a path, whatever it may be, I hope this kind of gives you something to sit with. Maybe it even helps you just take a small step towards it. I'll conclude to just say fear is very much a loud thing in our lives, but it's not always right and it's not always something we can trust. Thanks again for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.